In the last video, we established that karma is not a moral accounting system. It is a physics. The field configured by action. Bell's theorem, the most rigorously tested principle in quantum mechanics, echoes what the Bhagavad Gita described 5,000 years ago. Once a system acts, it leaves a permanent configuration in the field. That configuration does not disappear. But the Gita does not stop at the diagnosis. It gives you the precise mechanism for breaking the cycle. This video is that mechanism. If you watched the previous video, you already understand the entanglement model of karma. Every action leaves a samskara, a groove in the field of consciousness, not metaphorically. As a literal quantum configuration, a persistent pattern in the field that generates corresponding experiences with the same inevitability as an entangled particle generating a correlated measurement result. This is a structural parallel, not a claim that karma is literally quantum entanglement. Both describe persistent correlations between cause and experience that transcend apparent separation. The pattern is real. The entanglement is real. The question the Gita then answers is, how do you act in a way that does not generate new entanglement? How do you move through the field rather than against it? The answer is one of the most extraordinary practical frameworks ever developed by any civilization. 3 questions, all from the Bhagavad Gita, all confirmed by modern neuroscience. First, what is the mechanism of samskara formation? Why do some actions leave deep grooves and others leave none? Second, what is Nishkama Karma, the practice the Gita prescribes for acting without generating new entanglement? Third, what does the neuroscience say? What happens in the brain and body when you practice Nishkama Karma? And why does it work at the biological level? 3 questions. 1 ancient framework. 1 guided practice. Not all actions create samskaras equally. The Gita is precise about this. The depth of a samskara, the strength of the quantum configuration left in the field, is determined by 1 factor: identification. When the ego self, the contracted sense of being a separate, isolated agent, believes itself to be the doer of an action, a samskara forms. The belief in agency, in being the cause, is what creates the entanglement. This is quantum mechanics precisely stated. The observer who believes itself separate from the field generates a wave function collapse that configures the field in a particular way. That configuration, the samskara, persists. An action performed without identification, without the contracted ego claiming authorship, leaves no samskara, no groove, no entanglement, no consequence. Chapter 4, verse 20 of the Gita. Having abandoned attachment to the fruits of action, always satisfied, without any dependence, such a person, even though engaged in action, does not do anything. Does not do anything, not because no action occurs, but because no ego-identified doer is present to generate the entanglement. Modern neuroscience has a precise description of what happens in the brain when a samskara forms. Long-term potentiation. When a neural pathway is activated with emotional intensity, particularly with the emotional charge of ego identification, fear, desire, or attachment, the synaptic connections strengthen. The pathway becomes the default. The groove becomes the automatic response. Hebb's principle, established in 1949, is now summarized as neurons that fire together, wire together. The stronger the ego identification in the original action, the stronger the emotional charge, the deeper the synaptic groove. The samskara is not just a metaphysical concept, it is a measurable change in neural architecture. And the Gita's prescription for breaking the cycle, when applied correctly, is a precise protocol for preventing long-term potentiation from forming in the first place. The brain network responsible for ego identification, the contracted sense of being a separate self, is the default mode network. When the DMN is active, the self-referential narrative is running. I am doing this. This is happening to me. I caused this. This will affect me. This is the exact state in which samskaras form most deeply. High DMN activity, high ego identification, high samskara formation. Research by Judson Brewer at Brown University confirmed that advanced meditators, specifically practitioners of insight-based traditions including Vedic and Buddhist practices, show dramatically reduced DMN activity compared to non-meditators. Reduced DMN activity means reduced ego identification. Reduced ego identification means reduced samskara formation. This is what the Gita calls Nishkama Karma, and this is exactly what the neuroscience is measuring when it scans the brains of advanced meditators. Nishkama, without desire. Karma, action. Nishkama Karma is usually translated as desireless action or action without attachment to results. Both translations are partially correct and partially misleading. Nishkama Karma does not mean acting without caring about outcomes. It does not mean passivity. It does not mean indifference. It means acting from the level of the field, rather than from the contracted ego self that believes it is a separate agent generating consequences in isolation. The action still occurs. The outcome still matters. But the actor, the one who believes themselves to be the cause of the action, has dissolved back into the field from which the action arises. Chapter 3, verse 19. Therefore, without attachment, perform always the work that has to be done. For a person performing action without attachment attains the supreme. What follows is a structural parallel. The Gita and quantum mechanics arrive at the same functional description of ego-free action through entirely different methods. In quantum terms, Nishkama Karma is acting from the field state rather than the particle state. The contracted ego, the separate self, is the particle, localized, bounded, generating entanglement through every interaction. The field state, the awareness that is prior to identification with any particular particle, acts without generating new entanglement, because there is no separate entity present to be entangled. The action arises as it must. The field expresses itself as it must. But no samskara forms because there is no contracted observer claiming ownership of the action. This is not a philosophical position. It is a description of a specific state of consciousness that every contemplative tradition, and now modern neuroscience, has confirmed is directly accessible through systematic practice. The Gita is not alone in this prescription. The Taoist tradition calls the same practice Wu Wei, effortless action arising from the Tao rather than from the contracted self that believes it is separate from the Tao. The Buddhist tradition calls it anatta, action without a self. The practice of vipassana, insight meditation, systematically dissolves the identification with the self-referential narrative that generates karma in the Buddhist framework. The Hermetic tradition calls it the great work, the transformation from the contracted lead of ego identification to the gold of action arising from the all. Three traditions, the same practice, the same neuroscientific mechanism, the same quantum description. Nishkama Karma, Wu Wei, Anatta, three names for acting from the field. The single greatest obstacle to Nishkama Karma is not philosophical difficulty. It is the DMN. The default mode network runs automatically. It does not wait to be invited. The moment a thought arises, the self-referential loop begins. I am doing this. This is happening to me. I caused this. This will affect me. That loop, happening thousands of times per day, is the mechanism of continuous samskara formation. The Gita's practice does not ask you to stop the DMN. It asks you to disidentify from it. Not to suppress the self-referential narrative, but to recognize the awareness in which the narrative arises and to act from that awareness rather than from the narrative itself. The awareness that watches the DMN is prior to the DMN. It is the field. It is what the Gita calls the Atman. And from that level, no samskara forms. When ego identification drops, when DMN activity reduces, something measurable happens in the body. Heart rate variability increases. The heart's electromagnetic field expands and becomes more coherent. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone generated by the contracted self's threat responses, decreases. DHEA, the longevity hormone, increases. HeartMath research on practitioners of compassion-based practices, which are functionally equivalent to Nishkama Karma, confirmed all 4 biological changes occur simultaneously when ego identification reduces. The body, in the state of Nishkama Karma, is in its optimal biological configuration. The field is coherent. The samskaras are not forming. The quantum entanglement cycle is interrupted. Here is the recognition the Gita is pointing toward. There is an awareness present right now that has been present through every experience you have ever had. Through every action, every consequence, every samskara that formed and ripened, this awareness was present. It was never the doer, it was the witness. The contracted ego, the one who believed it was the doer, was a contraction within this awareness, not the awareness itself. When action arises from the awareness, from the witness, rather than from the contracted ego, no samskara forms. Because the awareness is already the field, and the field cannot be entangled with itself. Before the full practice, a brief noticing. Think of one action you took today. Any action, small or significant. Now notice, is there a sense of "I did that"? Not the action, the I that claims the action. Where is that I? The Gita says, look for the doer, and you will find only the field. The doer is the contraction. The field is what remains when the contraction relaxes. The cycle of karma continues not because the universe is punishing you, not because the entanglement cannot be broken, but because the contracted self keeps acting from the belief that it is separate, and that belief generates new samskaras faster than the old ones can dissolve. The Gita's solution is not to do less, not to withdraw from life, not to become passive. It is to recognize what you actually are before acting. Chapter 18, verse 17. One who is free from the ego sense, whose intellect is not tainted, though he kills all these people, he does not kill, and he is not bound. Not bound, not entangled, not generating new samskaras. Because the one who acts has recognized themselves as the field, not as the particle that believes it is separate from the field. You are not the contracted self moving through a world of consequences. You are the awareness in which the contracted self arises and in which all consequences arise and dissolve. From that level, the cycle does not continue, because there is no one present to be caught in it. The practice now, 3 steps, based directly on Chapter 3 of the Bhagavad Gita, not philosophical, functional. Sit comfortably, eyes closed. Step 1. Locate the doer. Bring to mind something you did recently that you feel some charge around, positive or negative. Notice the sense of I did this. Do not analyze it, just notice it. Where in the body does that sense of I live? The Gita calls this the ego sense, ahamkara, the contraction that claims authorship. Simply notice it, without judgment, without suppression. Step 2. Find the witness. Now notice the awareness that is watching the ego sense. The awareness that noticed I did this is not the I that did it. It is prior to that I. Rest in that prior awareness. This is what the Gita calls the Atman, the witness, the field, the awareness that was never the doer. Step 3. Act from the field. Now, from this witness awareness, think of one action you need to take today. Not from the contracted I, from the awareness that is watching. Notice how the action feels from this level. Less effortful, less charged with personal stakes. This is Nishkama Karma, not the absence of action, action from the field. Let the breath return naturally. The Bhagavad Gita was not written to explain the theory of karma. It was written to give Arjuna, and through him, every human being, the precise practice for breaking the cycle. Act from the field, leave no doer behind, form no samskara. Ancient wisdom, quantum proof, direct knowing. This is quantum gnosis.